The birth of Juan Diego, originally called Cuauhtlatoatzin, takes place at a moment of profound spiritual, cultural and political transformation in 16th century Mexico, when two completely different worlds were beginning to meet, often in conflict, but also in the mysterious action of divine providence. While the Aztec Empire was still leaving its deep marks on religious traditions, with a spirituality strongly tied to the gods of nature and to rituals that shaped all daily life, the Christian faith was beginning to be proclaimed by the Franciscan missionaries who arrived in the region after the Spanish conquest. It was a time of intense tensions, violence, ruptures, and hopes, in which many natives sought to understand who the God preached by the missionaries was and what this new way of life meant. In this setting, the humble figure of Juan Diego appears as fertile soil where God was silently preparing one of the greatest spiritual events in the history of the Catholic Church in the Americas. Juan Diego's initial spiritual formation was still marked by the indigenous environment in which he grew up, but his heart showed a rare sensitivity to welcome what came from God. Historical accounts show that he belonged to a simple people, accustomed to hard work on the land and to community life, but also deeply connected to the mysteries of creation. When he was introduced to Christianity, he did not receive this message with resistance or coldness, but with a surprising docility that revealed a heart capable of recognizing the truth when it manifested itself. His conversion was not the result of imposition, but of an interior encounter that marked his soul and awakened in him a sincere desire to live according to the gospel. Thus, Juan Diego began his journey as one of the first baptized indigenous people of the region, embracing the Christian faith with simplicity, depth, and a purity that would later make his extraordinary mission possible. Mexico of that period was a place of painful contrasts. On one side, the political and social changes brought by the Spaniards destabilized ancient structures and created tensions between colonizers and native peoples. On the other, the Christian faith encountered cultural barriers that made its full understanding difficult for the indigenous populations. Evangelization advanced, but with many hardships, especially because the relationship between the two peoples was deeply marked by wounds, misunderstandings, and distrust. Many indigenous people saw Christianity as the religion of the conquerors, and not as the revelation of the true God who desired to save them. This environment made the missionaries' task arduous and slow, and the converts often felt isolated between their ancient traditions and the demands of their new Christian life. It was precisely in this challenging terrain that God chose to act through someone humble, unknown, and completely distant from the structures of power. Juan Diego's humility is one of the most striking characteristics of his story, and one of the keys to understanding why Our Lady chose him to be the messenger of the apparitions of Guadalupe. He was not rich, had no political influence, and held no prominent position in society. He was a simple, hard-working man who lived in a discreet and quiet way. His daily life was marked by long walks, dedication to his family, and the practice of the newly adopted faith, which he sought to live with sincerity and devotion. Even though he was poor and little educated, his soul possessed a hidden greatness, shaped by work, simplicity, and the ability to listen to the voice of God amid difficulties. This deep humility prepared him not only to be a recipient of the divine message, but a docile and obedient instrument, capable of transmitting to the world the maternal desire of Mary. Another important element in Juan Diego's life is his relationship with his wife, Maria Lucia, who was also converted to Christianity. Although their marriage did not bear children, the accounts point to a bond marked by faith, respect, and the sharing of the simple life they led. The death of his wife years before the apparitions of Guadalupe brought great sorrow to Juan Diego's heart, but it also drew him closer to God. placing within him a spirit of surrender and trust that would become essential for the mission he was to receive. Widowhood led him to a more withdrawn life of greater prayer and dedication to the Christian community, preparing his heart to recognize the presence of Mary at the decisive moment that would transform not only his life but the entire spiritual history of the American continent. The path that Juan Diego frequently walked to Tlatelolco reveals much about his faith. He walked for kilometers in order to take part in catechesis, learn more about the gospel, and receive the formation that the missionaries offered to the new converts. The distance, physical effort, and natural difficulties of the region were not obstacles to his spiritual thirst, already at that time demonstrating an inner disposition that went beyond mere fulfillment of religious duties. With every step, his faith was strengthened, his understanding grew, and his soul opened more and more to divine grace. This quiet perseverance is one of the most impressive characteristics of Juan Diego's life, for it shows that his devotion did not depend on apparitions or extraordinary signs, but on a real and concrete love for God. This period is also marked by a sharp contrast between the beauty of the new faith and the difficulty of social coexistence between indigenous people and Spaniards. There were abuses, violence, and distrust, which made the full conversion of the native peoples even more difficult. Many indigenous people felt unprotected and voiceless before the new system imposed by colonization. It was precisely in this context of conflict and suffering that divine intervention would become even more evident. For God chose someone from among the people, someone fragile in the eyes of the world, to be the bearer of a message of consolation, reconciliation, and hope. The story of Juan Diego, when seen within this setting, reveals how much God acts in surprising ways and chooses unlikely instruments to accomplish great works. The Mexican landscape, with its mountains, its arid climate in some regions, and its long stretches of land, also deeply influenced Juan Diego's spiritual life. Nature has always played an important role in indigenous spirituality, and this sense of respect for creation helped him to perceive God's signs in daily life. Mount Tepeyac, which would later become the site of the apparitions, was not just a physical setting, but was laden with religious symbolism for the native peoples. When Our Lady appeared there, the choice of location was not by chance, but carried a profound meaning, connecting the history of the indigenous people with the new Christian message. Juan Diego, familiar with that environment, was able to recognize in the presence of Mary something divinely new, yet at the same time profoundly respectful of his cultural roots. Juan Diego's simple and profound faith also stood out for his capacity to listen. He was not a man who sought prominence or wanted to place himself before others. On the contrary, he lived in a discreet way, attentive to the needs of his brothers and obedient to the guidance of the missionaries. His inner disposition to listen to the voice of God, such a rare and necessary characteristic, made him the perfect instrument to be the messenger of Our Lady's words. His spiritual openness made it possible to perceive divine action amid human difficulties, and this sensitivity was essential for him to receive the mission entrusted to him with humility and courage. Finally, the early life of Juan Diego reveals a man deeply marked by sincerity, by the desire to live the faith with authenticity, and by openness to the mystery of God. He did not seek greatness or honors, but only fidelity to the gospel he had embraced. His simple heart, his anonymous path, and his obedient soul quietly prepared the ground for one of the most extraordinary chapters in Christian history, the apparitions of Our Lady of Guadalupe, which would transform not only the life of Juan Diego, but the entire future of evangelization on the American continent. This quiet preparation shows that God acts in simplicity and reveals himself to the humble, leading them to missions they could never imagine fulfilling. The morning of December 9th, 1531, dawned cold, silent, and wrapped in that characteristic feeling of the early hours of the day in central Mexico when the sun has not yet pierced the mist and nature seems to hold its breath. Juan Diego walked with a firm yet calm step toward catechesis in Tlatelolco, as he had done for months with dedication and constancy. His bare feet, or feet protected by simple sandals, knew the arduous path, but his heart was light, turned toward the things of God. It was in this atmosphere of recollection that, as he passed by Mount Tepeyac, he heard a soft, melodious song, so beautiful that it seemed to come from another world. This music, unlike anything that existed in either indigenous or Spanish culture, enveloped his soul so deeply that it made him stop immediately, seized by a mix of wonder and reverence. It was the beginning of the encounter that would forever change his life and the spiritual history of a continent. Right after the heavenly song, Juan Diego perceived an intense light rising at the top of the hill, a light that did not blind, but illuminated in a gentle and welcoming way, as if embracing whoever contemplated it. The arid landscape of Tepeyac, until then marked by dry and cold tones, seemed to transform, gaining vivid colors and a brightness never before seen in that place. Feeling drawn by that radiance, Juan Diego climbed the hill, not moved by mere human curiosity, but by an inner certainty that something sacred was about to happen. Each step he took seemed to draw him closer to a deep mystery that his humble soul was already beginning to recognize as coming from God. When he reached the top, his heart raced. Before him stood a lady, radiant, wrapped in a beauty so pure and lovable that his human strength almost failed before that heavenly presence. The Virgin Mary, in the form that would later be known as Our Lady of Guadalupe, appeared to Juan Diego as a young woman with indigenous features, dressed in garments that dialogued perfectly with the local culture, yet at the same time overflowing with supernatural light. Her blue-green mantle, embroidered with stars that seemed to pulse with life, contrasted with the rose-colored dress adorned with flowers that evoked creation and fertility. Juan Diego was deeply moved, not only by the beauty of the vision, but by the tenderness with which Mary looked at him. Different from the feared gods of his former culture, she presented herself with a maternal love that restored dignity to the souls of those who had been crushed by pain and conflict. Mary's face reflected a peace that was not of this world, and her voice, when she spoke, revealed such a deep affection that it penetrated the heart even before her words were understood. The first phrase Mary addressed to Juan Diego remains a milestone of divine love. "Juanito, my very dear son, where are you going?" These words, though simple, carried a tenderness capable of healing deep wounds in anyone's soul. The way she called his name, using affectionate diminutives of his native language, showed that God did not speak in a distant or cold manner, but truly entered the culture, heart, and history of his people. Mary did not come as a foreign or distant figure, but as a mother who seeks her children exactly where they are. For Juan Diego, hearing his name spoken in that way was like receiving a heavenly embrace, something that confirmed that God truly saw him, knew him, and loved him deeply. In tears, he answered humbly, saying where he was going and showing complete docility to that maternal presence. Mary then revealed her mission. She desired that a house, a temple, be built on Mount Tepeyac, where she could offer all her love to the people, listen to their supplications, and pour out abundant graces. It was not an ordinary request, but a call for Juan Diego to become the messenger of a divine intervention destined to restore peace, faith, and dignity to a deeply wounded people. The Virgin explained that she wished to show her true son to the indigenous people, who had been crushed both by cruel religious practices and by the atrocities of the conquest. It was as if Mary, Mother of all peoples, had come to unite divided hearts and renew hope in a region marked by pain and conflict. Deeply moved, Juan Diego felt at the same time the honor and the weight of that mission, which, given his simplicity, he had never imagined receiving. Juan Diego's reaction to the mission entrusted by Mary was a mixture of joy, astonishment, and fear. He knew the request was extraordinary, and that taking it to the bishop, a man of great authority and influence, would be a difficult task for someone so humble and without social prestige. Nevertheless, his sincere and obedient soul did not hesitate, for he recognized in that request a divine will. He offered himself immediately to fulfill everything Our Lady asked, without questioning his capacity or worthiness, but trusting fully that if God had chosen someone small, it was because he wanted to act through humility. This inner disposition reveals the greatness of Juan Diego, not a human greatness, but a spiritual one, marked by prompt obedience and a profound understanding that when God calls, he himself gives the necessary strength. Before taking leave of him, Mary consoled Juan Diego, assuring him that she would be with him in every step of the mission, like a mother who accompanies her child on a difficult yet hope-filled journey. The Virgin promised that her help would not fail, and that he should not fear rejection, doubt, or mistrust, for she herself would guide everything according to God's will. This promise was essential to strengthen Juan Diego's heart, who still did not fully understand the magnitude of the mission he had received. As he descended Mount Tepeyac, he felt transformed. The world seemed different, the air lighter, the light brighter, and his own heart, previously occupied by routine and concerns, now burned with the presence of Mary and with a firm desire to do her will. The walk to Tlatelolco and then to the palace of Bishop Zumárraga was long and challenging. Juan Diego carried within himself the supernatural experience he had just lived, but he knew he would have to express it in human words, imperfect and fragile. He had never spoken with figures of authority and had no rhetorical training or social status. Even so, he moved forward courageously, sustained by Our Lady's promise and by the inner certainty that his message was not his own, but God's. Each step he took seemed to echo the responsibility he carried, and yet his heart remained steadfast, for he knew he was obeying the noblest calling anyone could receive, to be a bearer of a heavenly message. The encounter with Our Lady that morning was not just an extraordinary event in the life of a simple man, but the beginning of a true spiritual revolution on the American continent. The apparition of Mary in indigenous attire, speaking the native language and manifesting unconditional maternal love, inaugurated a new chapter in the evangelization of the region. She did not come to destroy cultures, but to elevate them. Not to impose herself, but to embrace, not to condemn, but to care. Juan Diego understood that this encounter was not just for him, but for all his people, for all souls wounded by violence and loss of identity. He knew that he carried with him not only a request, but a sign of divine hope destined to transform lives and heal hearts. At the end of the first apparition, when Juan Diego resumed his path, Mount Tepeyac was no longer the same place he had known all his life. The presence of Mary had consecrated that simple ground, transforming it into a sacred space of encounter between heaven and earth. For Juan Diego, every stone, every plant, and every breath of wind now seemed imbued with the presence of God, as if nature itself had joined the divine revelation he had just witnessed. This profound feeling would accompany Juan Diego throughout his mission and mark his life forever, for he had been chosen to be a witness of a love capable of restoring an entire people. Upon arriving at the episcopal residence, Juan Diego felt the weight of the mission he carried, for despite the trust Our Lady had placed in him, his human smallness still made him fear not being heard or understood. The palace of Bishop Zumárraga, a wise, experienced man deeply committed to the evangelization of the indigenous peoples, imposed respect with its solid and imposing structure. Servants and religious moved through the corridors, each occupied with their responsibilities, and in the midst of that orderly and solemn environment, Juan Diego felt even more aware of his simplicity. Even so, he took courage, approached the guards, and humbly asked to speak with the bishop, not for personal interest, but to convey the heavenly message he had received. His heart beat fast, and his hands trembled, but his soul remained firm, sustained by Mary's promise. After waiting for some time, Juan Diego was finally led into the presence of Bishop Zumárraga. The environment was austere, marked by books, sacred images, and objects that reflected the bishop's pastoral and intellectual work. Zumárraga observed this humble man, who approached him with a mix of curiosity and prudence, for he knew that among the native peoples many spiritual narratives circulated, and not all were reliable. Noticing Juan Diego's sincere humility and reverence, the bishop decided to listen to him carefully. Juan Diego, for his part, bowed deeply as a sign of respect, preparing to recount what he had experienced on Mount Tepeyac. He knew his words were fragile before the greatness of the vision, but he trusted that God would guide his speech. With a trembling yet spiritually convinced voice, Juan Diego described to the bishop the apparition of the Lady of Heaven, her indescribable beauty, the heavenly light that surrounded her, and the message she had entrusted to him. His words flowed not like a rehearsed speech, but like a living testimony filled with truth and simplicity. He explained that Mary had asked for the construction of a temple at Tepeyac to welcome her people, offer consolation to the afflicted, and reveal the love of God. Juan Diego recounted in detail the tenderness with which the Virgin had treated him, the way she had called his name, the heavenly music he had heard, and the supernatural brightness that had transformed the surroundings. As he spoke, discreet tears ran down his face, for reliving the vision was like touching the divine mystery once more. Bishop Zumárraga listened attentively to every word, analyzing not only the content of the message, but also Juan Diego's attitude, his humility, and his lack of pretense. Despite the evident sincerity, Zumárraga was a prudent pastor, aware of his responsibility before the church and the indigenous people, and he knew he could not accept every extraordinary account without discernment. He recognized that God could indeed speak to the small and simple, but he also understood the risk of illusions, deceptions, or even cultural influences that could confuse the newly planted faith. Therefore, after hearing everything, he did not reject Juan Diego, but neither did he immediately accept his message. He asked him to return another day, giving himself time to reflect and better discern the situation. Leaving the meeting, Juan Diego felt a mixture of frustration and hope. Although the bishop had not completely discredited his account, he had also not embraced Our Lady's request. He understood that his mission would not be simple, and that he might face many more misunderstandings before Mary's design was fulfilled. However, his faith remained firm. He recalled the maternal words of the Virgin, who had promised him help and constant presence. Even though he had not achieved the expected result immediately, he felt strengthened by the certainty that he was doing God's will. Thus, with slow steps and moist eyes, he returned toward Tepeyac to tell Our Lady what had happened. Upon returning to Mount Tepeyac, Juan Diego was once again enveloped by that supernatural atmosphere that accompanied the presence of the Mother of God. Even before seeing her, his heart already burned with the certainty that she was there. When Mary appeared, radiant and full of love, Juan Diego prostrated himself before her and with great humility recounted all that had occurred with the bishop. Admirably, he asked Mary to choose another messenger, someone more important, more influential, or more worthy, for he considered himself too small for such a great mission. This attitude revealed even more deeply his humility and purity of heart. characteristics that made Juan Diego a perfect instrument in God's hands. Mary's answer, however, was firm, tender, and definitive. She stated that among all her children, it was precisely Juan Diego whom she wished to send. Her words carried a spiritual force that dispelled every doubt. She had chosen that simple man because God delights in acting through the small, so that his glory may shine even more clearly. Mary encouraged him, saying that he need not fear, for nothing would prevent him from fulfilling his mission if he trusted fully in divine providence. Eloquent and maternal, she reaffirmed that he was her messenger, her chosen one, and that he should return to the bishop and insist with the same confidence and obedience he had shown from the beginning. These words rekindled Juan Diego's spirit, giving him the courage he needed to face the bishop again. His soul was renewed before the presence of Mary, who radiated such profound peace that all human fear disappeared. The Virgin assured him that everything would happen in God's time and that he should act with patience and trust, for his mission was part of a much larger spiritual plan than he could understand. Consoled and strengthened, Juan Diego promised to fulfill once more the request of the Mother of God, ready to face any difficulty or humiliation out of love for his lady and for the true God whom she represented. When Juan Diego left Tepeyac for the second time, he walked with new vigor, although he still carried the vulnerability of someone who perceives himself small before the greatness of divine designs. He knew the bishop might again doubt or ask for further proof, but now he understood that his mission did not depend on his personal ability, but on God's will and Mary's maternal love. Each step he took was accompanied by a silent prayer in which he asked God for discernment, strength, and humility. This inner journey reveals Juan Diego's spiritual depth, for he did not act out of vanity, but out of obedience and love. As soon as he arrived once more at the episcopal residence, Juan Diego faced even greater difficulties, for the servants and guards, noticing his simplicity and insistence, tried to prevent him from gaining access to the bishop. They ridiculed him, distrusted his intentions, and treated him as someone of no importance. This situation, painful for any human being, revealed yet again the meekness and perseverance of Juan Diego, who did not respond with irritation or discouragement, but remained firm and respectful. His patience and docility eventually impressed even those who were trying to block his way, and this ultimately allowed him to be received again by Zumárraga. Appearing a second time before the bishop, Juan Diego repeated his message with the same fervor and even greater humility, explaining that the Lady of Heaven had sent him again to insist on the request for the temple. The bishop, however, maintained his pastoral prudence, and although he recognized the indigenous man's sincerity, said that he needed a clear sign, a supernatural proof that would confirm the authenticity of such an extraordinary apparition. This request, far from discouraging Juan Diego, became the door through which God would manifest to the world one of the greatest Marian miracles in history. With deep reverence, Juan Diego accepted the bishop's request and agreed to convey it to the Virgin, trusting that she would provide everything necessary to convince not only the bishop, but all the people of the authenticity of her message. When Juan Diego left the episcopal palace for the second time, his heart carried not only the responsibility of the mission, but also the hope that arose from the bishop's prudence. The request for a sign did not discourage him. On the contrary, it strengthened his confidence that Mary, being such an attentive and truthful mother, would provide exactly what was needed to confirm her message. The idea that a miracle was approaching did not fill Juan Diego with pride, but with humility, for he understood that if God chose to act in such an extraordinary way, it was not because of his merits, but to save souls and restore a deeply wounded people. As he walked toward Tepeyac, he meditated in silence on everything that had happened, praying simply that the divine will might be manifested through him without his own weakness becoming an obstacle. Upon arriving at Mount Tepeyac, Juan Diego once again found the Virgin Mary, wrapped in the same serene and heavenly light that had enchanted him from the first encounter. He approached with deep reverence and reported the bishop's request, explaining that Zumárraga had not rejected his message, but desired a clear sign confirming the divine intervention. Juan Diego, with sincere humility, acknowledged before the Mother of Heaven that he had nothing to offer, for he was poor and unknown, but he was willing to do whatever she asked. Mary listened to everything with a tenderness that calmed any human anxiety, and her maternal gaze showed that she had prepared an answer long before the bishop had expressed his need. It was evident that divine providence, always perfect in its designs, was directing every detail of the story. With a voice soft and at the same time firm, Mary asked Juan Diego to return to Tepeyac the next day so that she could give him the sign destined for the bishop. Her words overflowed with a divine confidence that filled Juan Diego's heart with joy and peace. She explained that the sign would be an occasion for a great manifestation of God's love and would demonstrate in an incontestable way that her message was not a human invention, but the fruit of heavenly action. Juan Diego promptly accepted the request with the same obedient spirit that had characterized him from the beginning of the apparitions, and promised to return at dawn. The Virgin then blessed him with maternal kindness, assuring him that everything would happen at the right time and that he should fear nothing. However, in the interval between that encounter and the following day, a great difficulty arose in Juan Diego's life, revealing that even those chosen by God faced deep trials. His uncle, Juan Bernardino, who had taken him in and lived with him, was struck by a serious and sudden illness. The high fever, extreme weakness, and the speed with which the sickness progressed filled Juan Diego with anguish, for his uncle was his only close relative and represented his little family. Caring for the sick man demanded all his attention and energy, preventing him from returning to Tepeyac on the appointed day. The urgent duty of seeking a priest to administer the sacraments to his uncle in danger of death also arose, and this Christian obligation spoke louder in his heart, revealing his fidelity to the gospel even in the face of the extraordinary mission entrusted to him by Mary. On the morning of December 12th, exhausted and deeply worried about his uncle's critical condition, Juan Diego took the road that would lead him to look for a priest. He decided, however, to avoid Mount Tepeyac, for he feared encountering Our Lady and feeling ashamed for not having kept the appointment. His intention was not to flee from the mission, but only to postpone the encounter until he had dealt with what seemed to him more urgent, ensuring that his uncle received the last sacraments. This attitude, far from showing a lack of faith, revealed Juan Diego's moral and spiritual greatness, for he sought to act according to charity without imagining that God had already provided everything in a way even more surprising than he could suppose. His attempt to go around Tepeyac, however, did not escape the notice of the Mother of God. Mary, with the attentive gaze of a mother who never abandons her children, appeared to him on that alternate path, intercepting him with a delicacy that at the same time corrected and consoled. The apparition in that unexpected place left Juan Diego surprised and deeply moved, for he recognized in that gesture the loving vigilance that only a mother possesses. He immediately explained to Mary the reason for his absence the day before, and his attempt to avoid the encounter at that moment. In tears, he shared his anguish over his uncle's illness, asking forgiveness for his apparent disobedience and begging her to understand the suffering he was going through. This sincere attitude, marked by humility and truth, deeply touched the Virgin's heart, who always manifested herself with mercy and compassion. It was then that Mary pronounced one of the best-known and most consoling phrases of all Marian apparitions. "Am I not here, I who am your mother? Are you not under my protection?" Her words, full of divine tenderness, pierced Juan Diego's heart like a balm that heals all wounds. She reassured him, saying that his uncle had already been healed by divine intercession and that he no longer needed to worry, for no affliction escapes the most vigilant love of the Mother of God. At that moment, Juan Diego experienced such a deep peace that all the anxieties that had consumed him in the previous days disappeared from his heart. It was as if a ray of heavenly light illuminated his entire soul, restoring his full trust in divine providence and renewing his courage to fulfill the mission entrusted to him. After consoling him, Mary asked him to climb to the top of Mount Tepeyac to gather the sign destined for the bishop. Without hesitation, Juan Diego ran to fulfill the lady's will, certain that God was directing every gesture of that moment. When he reached the top of the hill, however, he saw something that left him astonished. Despite it being the harsh winter, a season in which nothing blossomed in that arid region, the summit was completely covered with Castilian roses of extraordinary beauty and intense fragrance. These flowers, unknown in that climate and that soil, shone like jewels among the cold stones, revealing that a miracle of nature, transformed by grace, had taken place. Juan Diego immediately recognized that these flowers were the supernatural sign promised by the Virgin. With careful hands and a heart overflowing with emotion, he gathered the roses as Mary had instructed. Each rose seemed to radiate a special glow, as if it carried within itself the mark of divine intervention. When he returned to the lady's presence, he offered her the flowers with simplicity, and Mary, with maternal delicacy, arranged them carefully in his tilma, the indigenous garment he wore as a cloak. She adjusted each flower with loving precision, ensuring that none would be lost on the way, and instructed Juan Diego not to show the contents of the tilma to anyone until he was before the bishop. This gesture, so simple and at the same time so symbolic, showed how Mary not only offered a sign, but also prepared Juan Diego to live the moment of the greatest manifestation of God's love in his entire mission. When everything was ready, Mary sent him once again to the episcopal residence, assuring him that the sign would convince the bishop and confirm the authenticity of the apparitions. Juan Diego's heart burned with a mixture of gratitude, reverence, and expectation, for he knew he carried not only miraculous flowers, but the very divine message destined to transform the faith of an entire nation. He walked with firm steps, aware that the culmination of the mission was near and that the Virgin's sign kept in his tilma would be the key to opening the eyes of those who still doubted. Each moment was accompanied by a deep spiritual awareness that God was acting with greatness, but through the humility of a simple man chosen to be a witness of an incomprehensible love. When Juan Diego once again arrived at the episcopal palace, carrying in his tilma the miraculous roses gathered at Tepeyac, his heart beat with an intense mixture of reverence and expectation. Although he was a simple man, he knew he was about to witness something grand, not by his own merit, but through the direct intervention of the Mother of God. The guards still tried to prevent him from seeing the bishop, suspecting his insistence and simplicity, but Juan Diego's serene determination, sustained by grace, eventually convinced them. When he was finally led into the presence of Zumárraga, his face showed the weariness of his trials, but also an inner light that could not be explained by human reasons. He knew he was about to fully fulfill Mary's will. Before the bishop, Juan Diego bowed with deep respect and once again began to recount the events at Tepeyac, explaining that he had returned with the requested sign. His account, though simple, now carried the definitive certainty of someone who had been sustained by concrete miracles. As he spoke, the bishop observed every detail attentively, aware that this moment could determine not only the authenticity of the apparitions, but the spiritual course of the entire evangelization of the region. Juan Diego then grasped the ends of his tilma with trembling hands, preparing to release the contents that Mary had so carefully placed there. The room fell into a deep silence, as if heaven and earth were waiting together for the revelation prepared by divine providence. When Juan Diego opened his tilma, the Castilian roses fell before the bishop and those present, filling the room with a gentle, heavenly fragrance. But the true miracle manifested itself in the next instant. On the rough fiber of the indigenous tilma, a splendid image began to appear, not painted by human hands, but impressed with supernatural perfection. It was the image of the Virgin Mary, just as she had appeared to Juan Diego, young, with a serene face and indigenous features, wrapped in a blue-green mantle full of stars, wearing a rose-colored dress adorned with floral symbols deeply meaningful to the native people. The expression of maternal love that radiated from her face was so vivid that it seemed as though Mary herself were there, looking directly at each person present. The impact was immediate and overwhelming. Bishop Zumárraga, a prudent and experienced man, fell to his knees before the image, tears streaming from his eyes. He recognized in that moment that he was before an incontestable miracle, a divine work that surpassed any natural explanation. The image showed no brushstrokes, artistic techniques, or known substances. It was as if heaven itself had touched the tilma, imprinting on it a living and eternal presence. The others present also knelt down, seized by an indescribable emotion. Many did not fully understand the theological meaning of that event, but they felt in their souls that they were in the presence of something sacred, unique, and absolutely real. The reverent silence that followed was the most eloquent testimony to the magnitude of the miracle. Deeply moved, the bishop rose with difficulty, approached the image, and touched it with immense reverence, trying to steady his trembling hands. In that instant, he understood that the Mother of God had chosen the native people to reveal her presence in a unique way, and that Juan Diego had been the providential messenger of this divine intervention. Filled with gratitude and humility, he immediately believed in the truth of the apparitions and asked Juan Diego's forgiveness for any previous doubts. The bishop declared that he would fulfill Mary's will without delay, ordering the construction of the requested temple on Mount Tepeyac. It was the beginning of a new phase of evangelization in Mexico, marked by Mary's tenderness and the incontestable authority of the sign that heaven had sent. While the bishop contemplated the image, Juan Diego remained prostrate, deeply moved and amazed at the greatness of God. For him, that moment was not only the confirmation of his mission, but the revelation of Mary's indescribable love for her people. He recognized that the image, made permanent on his tilma, was not only a symbol, but a direct gift from heaven, a sign that would remain for all generations. He felt small, yet happy to have been chosen as an instrument of such a great work, understanding that his simplicity had been precisely the reason why God had chosen him. That image did not belong to him, but to the church, to the indigenous people, and to the faithful of all nations who would one day come to know the profound mercy of Our Lady of Guadalupe. The news of the miracle spread quickly throughout the region, reaching both Spaniards and native peoples. Within a few days, thousands of people began to travel to the place where the image was kept, moved by curiosity, devotion, or simply the need for spiritual consolation. Many indigenous people, upon contemplating the image, recognized in it profound symbols of their culture, inscribed in such a perfect way that only a divine intelligence could have harmonized them with the Christian message. At the same time, they felt embraced by that mother with features similar to their own, who did not come to impose a new faith by force, but to reveal the true God with love, tenderness, and beauty. The image of Guadalupe thus became a meeting point between cultures, a spiritual bridge capable of uniting two worlds, that until then had faced each other with violence and misunderstanding. The temple requested by Mary began to be built immediately on Mount Tepeyac, transforming that simple and little-valued place into one of the main spiritual centers of the continent. The workers, indigenous and Spanish, collaborated side by side, moved by a special grace that seemed to dissolve old tensions. The missionaries, who had previously faced immense difficulty in transmitting the faith, now were surprised to see crowds asking for baptism and desiring to know the gospel. The image of Guadalupe had become a living catechism, a silent theology capable of touching the heart even before the words were understood. In just a few years, millions of indigenous people sincerely converted to the Catholic faith, not by imposition, but by the real experience of Mary's love, which spoke to their culture, their history, and their souls. The miracle of the Tilma did not remain only as an initial event, but continued to manifest itself through its inexplicable integrity. Despite being made of extremely fragile vegetal fiber, a material that normally deteriorates within a few decades, the Tilma remained intact for centuries, resisting time, humidity, human contact, and even accidents that could have destroyed it. Scientists and researchers from various eras analyzed the image without finding natural explanations for its preservation or its origin. The eyes of the image, when studied with modern instruments, reflect details impossible to have been produced by artists of the 16th century, including the figure of Juan and other people present at the moment of the miracle. All this confirms that the work is not human, but divine. The presence of the image of Guadalupe marked the spiritual birth of a new people, uniting cultures and rebuilding wounded identities. From it, Mexico would begin to discover its vocation as a deeply Marian nation, and Our Lady of Guadalupe would come to be recognized not only as the country's patroness, but as star of evangelization throughout the Americas. Juan Diego, in turn, became the humble living witness of this miracle, bearing in his life the mark of God's predilection for the small. He never sought glory or recognition, but rejoiced deeply to see that the temple requested by the Mother of God was about to be completed. His mission had not ended, but was only entering a new phase. At the end of that extraordinary day, when the image had been officially recognized as miraculous, and the people were already beginning to gather in prayer, Juan Diego remained for a few moments silently contemplating the divine work imprinted on his old tilma. Every detail of the image reminded him of the encounter at Tepeyac, the indescribable look of tenderness, the light emanating from the mantle, the stars that seemed to reflect the sky of that day, the symbolism of the flowers and the moon. Everything spoke to his heart so deeply that he felt once more before the living presence of Mary. The gratitude that flooded his soul was so great that no words could express it. He knew that God had accomplished through his smallness something that would transform entire generations, and he offered it all to heaven with humility and love. After the miracle was made visible on the tilma, Juan Diego's life changed profoundly, but not in the sense of acquiring human prestige or earthly honors. On the contrary, he remained as simple as he had always been, even more aware of his smallness before the greatness of what God had done through him. Bishop Zumárraga, now fully convinced of the authenticity of the apparitions, invited Juan Diego to collaborate more closely with the church, especially in the construction of the temple requested by the Virgin. Although honored by the invitation, Juan Diego did not allow himself to be carried away by vanity. His only concern was to faithfully fulfill Mary's will. He wished to remain in humility and silence, allowing the miracle to speak for itself and the image of Guadalupe to be the true protagonist of the evangelization that was spreading across the continent. With the provisional temple already erected at Tepeyac, Juan Diego devoted much of his time to welcoming pilgrims, guiding them gently and sharing the testimony of the apparitions whenever asked. He never exaggerated or invented details. On the contrary, he recounted everything with extreme fidelity, aware that his mission was to transmit exactly what Mary had entrusted to him. His simple yet deeply spiritual presence touched the hearts of those who approached him. Many pilgrims reported feeling a special peace when talking to him, as if his humility and purity reflected the presence of the Mother of God herself. At the same time, Juan Diego did not seek recognition, but remained in constant prayer, thanking God for having made him an instrument of such a great work and asking for strength to persevere. In a short time, Juan Diego received permission from the bishop to live in a small hermitage beside the temple on the slope of Tepeyac. There he could dedicate himself to prayer, to caring for the sanctuary, and to serving the pilgrims, living in contemplation and simplicity. This choice was not the result of a desire for isolation, but of a deep inner calling, in which he perceived that his mission was not only to recall the miracle, but also to cultivate a spiritual environment that would allow the faithful to encounter Mary. He became the guardian of the image and of the sacred place, living a life similar to that of the first Christian hermits, marked by penance, charity, and deep union with God. His hermitage was a space of silence inhabited by grace, where he meditated at length on the mysteries of heaven and on the maternal love that had transformed his life. Over the years that followed, Juan Diego demonstrated an impressive spiritual maturity, which did not come from theological studies, but from his direct experience with the supernatural and from his absolute fidelity to the gospel. He was sought out by indigenous people and Spaniards, by the poor and those in authority, by the curious and the devout, and he welcomed everyone with patience, meekness, and profound humility. His presence became in itself a sign of evangelization, for his life reflected the action of grace. He taught not through elaborate speeches, but through concrete examples of faith, generosity, and love. Many who spoke with him reported feeling closer to God, and this capacity to touch souls revealed that his spiritual mission went far beyond conveying a miracle. He was an instrument of inner transformation for all who met him. Juan Diego's health, however, was not robust. Poverty and previous sufferings had left marks on his body, and the life of constant service demanded more of his strength than he could sometimes give. Still, he never complained. His joy came from the certainty that he was fulfilling the Mother of God's will, and this conviction sustained his every gesture, every renunciation, every sacrifice. There were days when his legs barely held him up, yet he still walked to the image of Our Lady to give thanks and ask for strength. At other times he felt intense pain, but maintained a serene smile, knowing that his cross, united to Christ's, had infinite value. His life was a continuous offering of silent love, accepted and lived with full trust in divine providence. Throughout the years, many Franciscan missionaries came to see in Juan Diego an exemplary model of a Christian, someone who embodied the values of the gospel in a living way. They respected him deeply and often turned to him to better understand indigenous sensitivity, for Juan Diego served as a bridge between cultures, helping to translate spiritually what the native peoples lived into the Catholic faith. His humility, his obedience, and his purity of life became a testimony for all, and his spiritual influence extended far beyond the apparitions of Guadalupe. In his simple gestures, he showed that holiness is not the privilege of the wise or powerful, but of the small who trust God with a pure heart. The indigenous people, for their part, saw in Juan Diego not only the messenger of the Mother of God, but also a brother who had remained faithful to their cultural roots and human needs. He welcomed them with respect, mediated conflicts, helped the poorest, and always conveyed hope to the afflicted. Many came to him not only to recall the miracle, but to seek advice, share their sorrows, and receive spiritual consolation. Juan Diego understood their pain, for he was one of them, and his compassion was so deep that many people reported experiencing immediate relief after speaking with him. His presence became a sort of extension of Mary's presence, who had chosen him precisely to touch the heart of her people with the same maternal tenderness she had shown at Tepeyac. Even living as a hermit, Juan Diego never isolated himself completely from community life. He took part in masses, helped in liturgical celebrations, and collaborated with the missionaries whenever necessary. His prayer life was intense, marked by long periods of silence before the image of Guadalupe, where he meditated on the mysteries of the Incarnation and on Mary's role in the history of salvation. Many times at dawn, he was seen kneeling in the small chapel, offering God the new day, and placing in the Virgin's heart the intentions of the pilgrims. His spirituality was deeply Marian, but entirely centered on Christ, as he himself often repeated, "She leads us to her Son." As the years passed, the number of pilgrims increased enormously, and the small temple at Tepeyac became one of the most important spiritual centers of the New World. Amid this growth, Juan Diego remained faithful to his mission, resisting any attempt to make him an object of cult or exaggerated veneration. He always said that the miracle was not about him, but about the Mother of God and the infinite love she had for all her children. His constant humility was, in itself, a testimony against the pride and vanity that so often threaten human hearts. He lived each day as a new opportunity to serve and love, aware that his mission would end only when God called him. In the last years of his life, already greatly weakened by age and accumulated fatigue, Juan Diego continued to offer his suffering as a prayer for the conversion of his brothers. His union with God deepened so intensely that many accounts state it was possible to see in his eyes a supernatural peace, the fruit of a life totally surrendered to heaven. He understood that his journey was drawing to a close and faced it not with fear, but with the serenity of one who knew he would see again the mother who had visited him at Tepeyac. In his heart, there was only gratitude. Gratitude for the miracle God had performed, for the conversion of millions of indigenous people, for the building of the temple at Tepeyac, and for the image of Guadalupe that transformed lives in ways he could never have imagined. His heart, once humble and simple, had become a living tabernacle of love and trust. He wished to depart with the same disposition with which he had lived, offering himself totally to God. In his last days, Juan Diego could scarcely walk, yet he still dragged himself with silent effort to the little chapel to contemplate the image of the Virgin. There, before Mary's merciful gaze, he prayed at length for the pilgrims, for the missionaries, for the indigenous peoples, and for the entire new nation being born under the mantle of Guadalupe. His prayer was deep and continuous, and many accounts affirm that even with a weak voice, he repeated expressions of love and trust as if in a direct dialogue with heaven. The missionaries who accompanied him were impressed by his serenity and peace, recognizing that they were in the presence of a truly holy man. There was no trace of vanity in him, only a sincere desire to place his soul in God's hands. The moment of his death was described as an event filled with grace. On June 24, 1548, in his modest hermitage beside the sanctuary, Juan Diego felt his strength fade like a candle that has fulfilled its time. He asked to receive the sacraments, and after confessing with deep humility, received the Eucharist with tearful devotion. Then he turned his gaze to the image of Guadalupe, which seemed to radiate a more intense glow at that moment. According to traditional accounts, Juan Diego smiled softly before closing his eyes, like someone who sees something beautiful and familiar, and gave up his soul to the Creator. His death was peaceful, without agony, wrapped in a supernatural peace that confirmed the holiness of his life. The people said that the Virgin's messenger had returned to his true home. The news of his death spread quickly, and both indigenous people and Spaniards flocked to Tepeyac to pay him homage. Many wept not only the loss of a friend and brother, but the departure of a man whose life had been a luminous example of faith. He was remembered not for military feats or riches, but for humility, fidelity, and the ability to let God accomplish great works through his smallness. His tomb, located in the first hermitage beside the temple, quickly became a place of respectful veneration, where many pilgrims knelt to thank God for the miracle of Guadalupe and ask for the intercession of the one who had been chosen to be the messenger of the Mother of God. For all, Juan Diego was a sign of hope and divine love. Over the centuries, Juan Diego's legacy did not diminish, but grew in an impressive way. The image of Guadalupe spread throughout the Americas and then throughout the world, becoming one of the greatest symbols of the Catholic faith. Millions of people found consolation, miracles, conversion, and hope before that image, which bore within itself a universal language capable of touching the heart of every culture. Juan Diego, although for a long time little known outside Mexico, was in fact the human key to one of the greatest spiritual events in history. His docility allowed Mary to speak to the entire world, and his simple life became a beacon that illuminates generations. With each century, more and more faithful came to recognize in him a perfect example of Christian humility. Devotion to Our Lady of Guadalupe became so strong that in 1754, Pope Benedict XIV declared her patroness of Mexico, and in 1945, Pope Pius XV proclaimed her Empress of the Americas. Throughout history, countless popes have shown deep reverence for the image of Guadalupe and have recognized Juan Diego's singular role in the apparitions. His canonization, desired by many devout souls, became reality only in recent times, when the Church, after a long process of historical and spiritual investigation, officially confirmed his sanctity. On July 31, 2002, Pope St. John Paul II canonized Juan Diego Cuauhtlatoatzin in the Basilica of Guadalupe, before an immense crowd that celebrated not only a saint, but the triumph of God manifested through a poor and humble man. Juan Diego's canonization was not only an act of belated recognition, but a universal proclamation that God writes his history of salvation through the small. John Paul II emphasized that Juan Diego is a model for all Christians, especially for those who feel unworthy, forgotten, or incapable. He showed that true spiritual greatness does not depend on education, power, or wealth, but on an available heart capable of listening to God's voice. His testimony remains alive in the sanctuaries, in popular devotions, in theological studies, and above all, in the millions of pilgrims who climb Tepeyac every year in search of Mary's light. Thus, Juan Diego remains not just a historical figure, but a spiritual presence guiding the faithful to the Mother of God. The Basilica of Guadalupe, built and rebuilt over the centuries, has become one of the largest pilgrimage centers in the world, receiving millions of visitors every year. There, the miraculous image continues to radiate grace, and many are still moved when they think that the maternal face that welcomes all nations was revealed to a poor, simple, ordinary man. This reality is, in itself, a profound teaching. God chooses what is small in the eyes of the world to confound the strong and reveal his infinite mercy. Juan Diego remains a witness to this divine choice, reminding us that every person, however humble, has immense value in the Creator's eyes. He teaches us that holiness is accessible to all who give themselves in love. Today, Juan Diego's spiritual legacy echoes not only in Mexico, but throughout the Church. His testimony inspires missionaries, religious priests, and lay people who seek to live the faith with authenticity and humility. He reminds us that Mary continues to act in history, leading her children to Christ with the same maternal tenderness manifested in the apparitions of Guadalupe. Juan Diego shows us that the true Christian mission does not consist in grand speeches, but in obeying God with simplicity, allowing Him to shape us, and letting His light shine through our small acts of love. His example remains alive as a call to docility, trust, and humble service. Finally, when we contemplate the life of Saint Juan Diego in all its spiritual depth, we understand that he was not merely the messenger of a miracle, but also a living expression of the gospel itself. His humble existence showed that God's grace finds a dwelling in pure hearts. His obedience showed that the divine will can transform history. And his silent love opened the way for one of the greatest Marian manifestations in the world. He continues to be, even today, a bridge between heaven and earth, between the Mother of God and her children. His legacy is eternal, for it is inscribed in the heart of the Church and in the hearts of all who let themselves be touched by the maternal gaze of Our Lady of Guadalupe.